ever swear to yourself you were gonna do the thing? The big thing. The one you keep telling people about at dinner. One day, I'm gonna write that book. One day, I'm gonna build that business. One day, I'm gonna learn to paint, to code, to play the guitar my daddy left me. And then one day comes, and one day goes, and one day stretches into 1 year. And you've got nothing to show for it except a list of reasons why the world kept getting in your way. Now listen, I read a book called Deep Work by a fella named Cal Newport. And Newport opens his book by telling you about a psychiatrist named Carl Jung, the great Swiss thinker, who built himself a 2-story stone tower on a lake back in 1922 just so he could sit somewhere nobody could reach him and think. Newport uses that tower to say, the great work of the world gets done by people who can sit still inside their own heads. Well, that idea reminded me of a story. Story of a man who had the tower and didn't know what to do with it. Let me tell you about Edmund.
Edmund was 41 years old. The year was 1954, and he had just taken the most peculiar job in New England. He'd been a newspaper editor in Boston for 15 years. Loud office, phones ringing, deadlines every hour. Divorced, no children, always saying the same thing at parties. If I had some quiet, I'd finally write that novel I'd been planning since I was 22. So he quit, took a position as a lighthouse keeper on a fog-wrapped cliff off the coast of Maine. Stone tower, crashing waves, no neighbors for 11 miles. Nothing but salt, seagulls, and silence. And you all listening? 6 months in, 6 months! Edmund had written 3 pages. 3. Not 3 chapters, not 300, 3 pages. And he was convinced it was because he hadn't quite set up his desk right yet.
Here's what Edmund did every day.
He woke at 6. He polished the brass fittings on the lamp for an hour and a half. They didn't need it. He just liked the shine. Then he catalogued the seabirds he saw from the gallery. Then he rewrote yesterday's log in neater handwriting. Then he swept the spiral staircase. Then he made lunch, which took 2 hours because he ground his own coffee beans by hand now. That's the kind of man he'd become. Then he read the same 3 magazines. Then he polished the brass again. And every night, when the lamp was lit and the fog rolled in, Edmund would sit down with his notebook, look at page 4 of his novel, the page that had been blank for 6 months, and tell himself, tomorrow I'll really get into it. Newport's got a name for what Edmund was doing. He calls it busyness as a proxy for productivity. When you don't know what real work looks like, you fill your day with visible little tasks so you feel productive and others see you working. Edmund wasn't fooling the seagulls, but he sure was fooling himself. Until one October morning, the fog so thick you couldn't see your own hand, Edmund pulled a loose brick out of the wall by the stove. Behind it, a leather-bound journal from 1911, written by a keeper named Thomas Ames. And Thomas Ames had scheduled his days different. At the top of every page was a phrase Edmund had never seen before. Lamp hours, 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. Keeper not to be disturbed. Keeper disturbs no one. Edmund thought it meant Ames tended the lamp at dawn. But it didn't, because underneath those words, page after page, were ideas. Sketches of engines Ames was designing, essays, letters to his son. 2 hours a day, 40 years back, in this same tower, this other man had sat down and done one thing. Hard, focused, uninterrupted thinking. And in that leather book was the evidence. A mind that had actually made something. Edmund sat on the floor that morning and realized the tower had never been the problem. He was the problem. So he tried it. Next morning, 6 o'clock sharp,
notebook open, pen ready. 2 hours, nothing but the novel. For 17 minutes, he stared at the page. Then he remembered he hadn't cleaned the lamp oil funnel. So he got up and cleaned it. Came back, wrote 1 sentence. Then remembered the wood stove needed checking. Came back, read the sentence he'd written. Didn't like it. Crossed it out. By 8 o'clock, he'd produced half a sentence. And he was exhausted. Now, Newport explains exactly what was happening to Edmund. He cites a researcher named Sophie Leroy, who studied what happens when you jump off one task and onto another. She calls it attention residue. And what she found is this. Every time you switch, a piece of your mind stays behind on the thing you just left. You can't get all of yourself back. Edmund hadn't spent 17 minutes writing. He'd spent 17 minutes leaking his attention all over the lighthouse. Here's where the story gets good. Because Edmund didn't quit. He'd already quit Boston. He'd already sold his apartment. He was not going to fail at the one thing he'd designed his entire life around. So he got ruthless. He moved the brass polish to the shed, out of the tower entirely. He moved the magazines to a locked trunk. He moved his toolkit down to the boathouse. He made a rule. From 6 to 8 in the morning, the only thing in that room was him, the notebook, a mug of black coffee, and the novel. If he wanted anything else, he had to walk down 132 steps to get it, and then back up. He didn't walk down once. And week 1 was agony. Newport writes about this. He says the problem isn't that we can't focus. The problem is we've trained our minds to expect a constant drip of novelty. And when that drip stops, the mind screams for it like a child in a grocery store. He calls it embracing boredom, learning to sit with the discomfort of an empty, undistracted moment until your brain remembers how to think again. Edmund sat and squirmed and sat and wanted to run and sat some more. By week 3, something strange happened. At 7:23 in the morning, Edmund looked up and an entire hour had gone by. And he had 300 words of actual story on the page. Real words. A real scene. His character was alive. He wept into his coffee. He didn't even know why. But I gotta tell you about the valley, because there's always a valley. Month 2. Edmund had his ritual. Same chair, same mug, same light. And the words were coming. Some days 50, some days 400. But one gray Tuesday, he sat down and nothing came. Not a sentence, not a word. Just fog in his head, thicker than the fog outside the window. And he started to wonder if he'd been fooling himself this whole time. Maybe he wasn't a writer. Maybe he was just a middle-aged man with a lighthouse and a notebook. And a sad little delusion. Newport has something to say about this, too. He quotes a researcher, a fellow named K. Anders Ericsson, who studied how people actually become excellent at things. And Ericsson's finding was this. You don't get good by putting in casual, comfortable hours. You get good through deliberate, uncomfortable, focused effort. The discomfort isn't a sign you're failing. The discomfort is the work. So Edmund showed up Wednesday. Same chair, same coffee, same 2 hours. Wrote 74 words. Showed up Thursday, 81 words. Showed up Friday, 600. The habit had become the thing. Newport talks about this through the story of a doctoral student named Brian Chappell,
who wrote his whole dissertation in the 2 hours before his real job each morning, and who said the rhythm made it, and I quote Newport here, astronomically productive and guilt-free. Because when the work is scheduled, you don't have to decide to do it anymore. The decision is already made. All that's left is to show up. 14 months after Edmund pulled that brick out of the wall, he mailed a manuscript to a publisher in Boston. 281 pages. He was polishing the brass on the lamp, out of habit, not avoidance now, when the reply came. It was an acceptance letter. He didn't jump. He didn't holler. He just sat down on the top step of the tower, looked out over the water, and realized something that made his eyes sting. The silence hadn't made him a writer. The isolation hadn't made him a writer. The lighthouse hadn't made him a writer. He'd done it in the same 2 hours every morning, while the rest of his life stayed exactly as chaotic and tempting as it had ever been. 2 hours of the deepest, quietest, hardest work he'd ever done in his life. Cal Newport puts it this way in Deep Work. A deep life is a good life. Not a busy life, not a fancy life, a deep life. Edmund had spent 41 years running from the deep, and it took a stone tower, a dead keeper's journal, and 132 stairs between him and his distractions to teach him that the deep had been waiting for him the whole time. Let me ask you something, friend, and I want you to really sit with this one. What is the deep thing you keep pushing to tomorrow? The book? The business? The conversation? The calling? The thing that if you actually sat down and did it for 2 uninterrupted hours a day would change your entire life in a year? I'd love to know. Drop it in the comments below. Not the excuse, just the thing. Naming it is the first step. Now listen to me close. Most of us don't need a lighthouse. We don't need to quit our jobs, or move to the coast, or find a leather journal in a wall. What we need is 2 hours. 2 hours we stop negotiating with. 2 hours the phone stays in another room. 2 hours the brass stays unpolished. If you've got a dream sitting on page 4 of a notebook somewhere, collecting dust, waiting for the perfect conditions, please go get Cal Newport's book. It's called Deep Work. Newport will give you the tools. He'll give you the language. He'll give you permission to guard your attention like the treasure it actually is. And if this old grandpa's story meant something to you tonight, do me a small kindness. Tap that like button. Subscribe to this channel so I can find you again next week with another story. And go pick up the book. Read it slow. Read it deep. The way it was meant to be read. Because a busy life will fill up on its own. But a deep life? That one you have to build. 2 hours at a time.